I think it's time to tiptoe through the tulips. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. I'm happy to talk to you today about a documentary that was really touching, that brought me back to memories of my childhood. If you know who Tiny Tim is, he is one of the most unique musical talents, and dare I say, even a comedian in a way. Just a really one of those very difficult to put in a box of like what exactly his appeal was. But I grew up watching Tiny Tim. He was a television personality and became a huge star. And this documentary, Tiny Tim, King for a Day, is fun. You need to see this documentary to learn about Tiny Tim's career. I'm ecstatic to have the director of the film, Johan von Sydow. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast, Johan. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You're in Sweden right now, is that right?
Yes, correct. In Stockholm, Sweden.
And I just want to, we were chatting just briefly before we started recording the podcast, but you are from the same family as Max von Sydow. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. The same German guy who immigrated like in the 18th century.
Yes. I'm a fan of so much of what Max von Sydow has done. So I'm happy that I was able to pronounce your name correctly. So there we are. But what led to this? It's really one of those things where it's just like, okay, who's like Tiny Tim? And I don't know. And as soon as a light was shined on him and he was able to show his talent, he exploded. I mean, like, you have talk show footage in their historical talk show footage where they got more letters about him, more response than any guest that they'd ever had on I think it was the Johnny Carson show. And I do remember he was a phenomenon when I was a little kid. Every time he was on, it was like a special event every time he appeared on a TV show. How did you get involved in like wanting to explore his story and then get such amazing access to his family and archives and all the footage?
It was exactly 9 years ago now that I heard about him. I hadn't heard about him. He was never in Sweden. He was in England and Germany, but never in Scandinavia. So we didn't know about him practically. But then I was doing a film about a Swedish artist, and his friend told me that he loved Tiny Tim, and then he started laughing and his tears fell. He laughed so hard. So I had to Google him, and I immediately started to cry too, because I thought, who is this guy? What has he been through? He was such a character. And I Googled and I said, I want to see the documentary about him. And I didn't find one. So I thought, that's my profession. And my friend Malik Benjelloul was at the moment doing Searching for Sugar Man. And then I thought, he can do a film about an American artist. I can do that too. So that was the beginning.
It's really interesting that there is sort of a tragedy to him. There's a deep sadness, and I began to feel watching your documentary that in a way music became like his therapy, right? Like it became a way for him to exercise his demons, and his sort of weirdness was also his appeal. I mean, he's just this, and I think I can't really explain why he became so huge in America, but I do remember as a kid thinking that I felt very weird and just sort of a misfit. So I identified with Tiny Tim being, I'm a weird misfit, and I'm just going to embrace that part of myself. How did you go about uncovering all of this archival footage? Archival documentaries obviously take years trying to uncover, and there's just so much stuff I didn't know about Tiny Tim. How did you go about uncovering all the archival footage?
Well, the film wouldn't have been possible to make without Justin Martell, who is like the #1 Tiny Tim expert in the world. He's a guy from New York, and when I started 9 years ago, I Googled and I found some information about him writing Tiny's biography, that he was doing that. So I contacted him. So we have been cooperating ever since. And then his book was released maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. So it's a lot of it is based on his research. He knows everybody. He knows like all the widows or ex-wives, and he knows everybody. So without him, no film.
I also feel what I love that you focused on was his early in two things that really struck me. One was his evolution as an artist, how he became Tiny Tim, right? Like, and just sort of had this like revelation about his voice. And then additionally, this heartbreaking sweetness. I mean, he is beyond a romantic and a very traditional, those two things. I mean, I really loved him before, but now I feel like I love Tiny Tim even more from seeing your documentary.
He gets into your heart.
Yeah, he just like, and I feel like those parts of him, there really was like this almost childlike purity to what he did. In your exploration and all of your excavation of his career, so to speak, what were some of the things that struck you and surprised you most?
I mean, it's we could make like 5 more movies about Tiny Tim, things he has been through with all his managers, mafia managers, and his like his best friend the last few years, Johnny Pineapple. He was telling stories that Tiny had told him. He has such a life in the shadow of business, of the show business in the US. I don't know what is the most. I mean, I think the most that struck me the most maybe was that he was in the 60s before his breakthrough. He had quite a big following in New York, in Greenwich Village, and there were hip people, like there were Bob Dylan, who was his friend, and there was Jonas Mekas and D.A. Pennebaker, and they all thought that he was such an artist. He was such a Gowl or something like that, and he could have been something more serious, like a serious artist in that underground world. But then Hollywood got its eyes on him, and he was turned into this huge thing that a lot of people laughed at. They thought that he was a laughing stock, and his career took that direction instead. It was more like by chance, I think.
But I get the sense that he kind of embraced that part of him. Like, laugh all you want. I am at his core, he's incredibly entertaining. Even like, you know, the music is one side, but his interviews were always very unusual and went to places that were just so bizarre. I guess the only person I could even think about that you could compare is like an Andy Kaufman, except I don't think for Tiny Tim it was an act. He was just like, you know, this is just me, and just like, this is me. Take it or leave it. This is who I am. Andy Kaufman was always some sort of bit for him. I'm curious how you mentioned like you could do 5 documentaries. I do feel like you could do a documentary series. This is sort of the greatest hits of his life. And I never knew the story about his. I remember hearing that he had died. I didn't know the story about his tragic death. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, he was like 62 years old, and he didn't take very good care of his health. So he ate very badly, and his beliefs made him. He didn't want any surgery on his body. It wasn't God's will that he should like make a surgery in his heart when he needed that, and things like that. And he got a heart attack on stage. There's a footage of that when he just falls from the stage, but he survives, and the doctors say you must stop performing. and his widow says that she didn't understand how much he needed the audience and the applause. So in just a couple of weeks, he was up on stage again, and just a month later, he got another second heart attack and fell into her arms and died.
I mean, it's horribly tragic, but it just his whole purpose in life was around entertaining people and that adulation from the audience. It's a remarkable documentary, Tiny Tim King for a Day. Thank you for taking time to talk to us on the Film Threat podcast, Johan.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. It's a great doc. And if you don't know who Tiny Tim is, this is the perfect way to discover his work. Really an incredible talent and a loss. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.